Cache-maniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
I'm Daryl W4.
With the bad cop.
And welcome to the GeoGearHeads Beta.38.
Tonight, we're joined by a listener to talk about waypoints, POIs, and paperless caching.
Of course, all of this applies to geocachers, and these options and their applications depend largely on which unit you'll be using.
Now, I have to say, I'm kind of a waypoint guy myself. Those just seem to work much easier with the Garmin Oregon, especially for multi and puzzle caches. I think that comes from my days with the eTrex. So I'm really looking forward to this episode to hear the differences, and you never know, I might just change my mind.
Yeah, I tend to be a paperless guy myself, and our guest tonight is a POI type of guy.
So, looks to me like we got all our bases covered.
We should indeed. Quick reminder that we are recording the GeoGearhead shows live through the Google Plus on-air feature, which allows you to join us live or watch the recording later.
Now, each week we record just a bit past 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, and you can watch us there. If you can find that on Google Plus, you circle the GeoGearHeads, or watch our Twitter feed for a link for the YouTube stream. Afterwards, you'll find those videos on YouTube, and you can link to each one of them. And the link to each one of them can be found in the show notes at cachemaniacs.com.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little tongue-tied already tonight. Yeah, but we're going to bring in our guest now, and maybe he can help rescue us a little bit. Thanks, Steve of Winter Trio, for joining us.
Hi, guys. Thanks for bringing me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Well, why don't we actually start with a quick description of which each of these types of things are?
Well, we need to mention that this is going to be a somewhat Garmin-centric show. That is to say, waypoints are locations you record and store on a device, so that these can be created, edited, and deleted right from the device. Most current Garmin units support, well, about 500 waypoints.
Well, the POI stands for Points of Interest, and that's a layer on the maps. They can be loaded into the device and cannot be edited or removed from the device. Their big advantage, though, there's virtually no numeric limit as to the number of waypoints a unit can hold.
Now, paperless caching is the feature where the geocaches are specifically loaded into the GPSR with their information, and all that can be displayed on the GPSR. The application of this feature varies between devices, and even more between manufacturers. In general, the units can hold about, let's say, at least 500 caches. Many of the new Garmin's up to 2,000, and others up to 10,000 paperless geocaches.
And it should be noted that the paperless caching is a newer feature, but pretty much any of the new handheld outdoor GPSs are going to support the paperless caching. So that's the one that's definitely not supported on all units, but the POIs and the waypoints are pretty much supported on every unit that you've had, at least as long as it supports the mapping. If you don't have mapping, a lot of those units won't support the POIs.
Exactly.
Well, we've kind of already stated our positions that Bad Cop, you're actually more of a waypoint kind of person. I've fallen in love with the paperless caching feature pretty much since they started putting that into the GPSs with the Colorado, and really even before that, Magellan with the old Explorers line had some kind of workarounds to support a paperless-like caching, and I like that one. And then we brought Steve from Winter Trio on because he's actually written in and given us a lot of helpful information about using POIs. So why don't we start with you, Steve, and get a little bit of a feeling why it is that you like the POIs.
When we first started caching, it was with a Nuvi and an old eTrex Vista, I think, first generation. So the waypoint density on that eTrex was pretty minimal. And the Nuvi, there was no other option. After finding some GSAC macros, I found I could load those into the Nuvi as a big POI file that gave me all the information I needed. When we upgraded from the Vista to a 60 CSX, I had the waypoint feature, but I still, when I prepared the file for the Nuvi, I realized I could just put that same file on my 60, and just having more than that 1,000 waypoint limit was really what got me at the POI stage. It also allowed me to do custom icons, whereas with the waypoint features, if you're going to use the geocaching functionality on my 60, every geocache was the little treasure chest if you wanted to mark them as found and things like that. And with the POIs, I've got custom icons for, a micro traditional, a small traditional, large, regular, and then all of the other, puzzle, multi. So it makes it from the map really easy to see what's nearby as far as type of cache.
Well, and it's a nice function, especially way back with the, I shouldn't really say way back, but with the original 60s that became kind of the gold standard. That was the big advantage to most of the cachers that I knew who were using it, is you could have the icons, and you had to go and essentially hack, it's not that difficult, but hack the icons into the 60 and then run a GSAC macro that would then take and put the appropriate icons from the unit onto those onto the POIs, so that it was really nice when you saw that map and had the actual icons for traditional, for the multis, for the puzzles, so that just looking at the map you got a good feeling of what was what around you.
Now, Steve, you said that it puts in a lot of information into the POI about the geocache. Could you tell us a little bit about that, and what kind of information are we looking at?
For our Nuvi, the macro that we found for GSAC, it would add the full description, the hint, the logs, pretty much everything that was in that cache on GSAC could be dropped into the Nuvi. With the 60, obviously, there's 80 character limit or something like that. So pretty much all I get right now is I just put in the hint. Makes the files a lot smaller, not having to load in all of that extra information that it can't display.
Mm-hmm. I can see that. So do you tend to use the 60 more or the Nuvi?
I pretty much use the 60.
Okay.
My wife sometimes still uses the Nuvi, but the battery life is so poor now after however many years that it lasts maybe an hour out in the field now. So
okay.
Even she has moved on to her iPhone and with a backup of the 60, and I use the 60 primarily, and the iPhone is my backup.
Yeah, so it's kind of an important note there that you're not using the POIs in any way to mark how you've found a cache or which ones you found and didn't find. That's all done externally, because there really is no way to do that found using just the POIs.
Right. In my 60, I will sometimes just mark a waypoint so I know that it's there, so it'll put a mark in my 60, but I use Geosphere to do all of the waypoint logging for what we found and things like that.
Right, and that's an excellent workaround that a number of the cachers around here have used, is to create a waypoint to mark that you had found that cache. So there's no way, for them to know just looking at those POIs, because you can't change or edit those POIs on screen, but you can go and create a waypoint that you can then go back and find, with all of the traditional geocaching support that were in those older units. If you're on one of the newer units with the paperless caching, and some of those will support, some of those won't, but typically I'll just say that you can't really do any caching support if it's not loaded in ahead of time. But I'm getting ahead of myself over there. So Bad Cop, tell us why it is that you like the waypoints, because we've kind of talked a little about using those now as an accessory to POI. So waypoints kind of change the way that you cache entirely.
Yeah, I tend more towards the waypoint simply because you can edit them out in the field. So using GSAC, I'll pull out any updated coordinates, put that in as the waypoint. Or really, I use them for multi and puzzle caches, being able to edit that in the field as you're going along. Now, I say that because I started with the eTrex Legend, and that was the easiest way to do that. I carried that on to the Oregon as well. However, I also loaded the paperless information, so I could just drag and drop a GPX file, get all the paperless information right there, the hint, any updated logs, and be able to work that as well. So,
well, the waypoints are really the way that caching had been done since its inception until paperless caching came out, and POIs were an alternative to give you more than what waypoints could do, but at the same time, you had some other problems to work around. So if you have one of those older units that doesn't support the paperless caching, the waypoints is the default. If you go through the plugins on the websites, if you go through the software on your desktop, the default is going to be use waypoints instead of POIs, because that gives you the option of going in and changing, editing, deleting. And on a lot of those old Garmin units, you did get the calendar to tell you which caches you had found.
I don't remember if I had that on the Legend, but I think you just called me old.
I thought
this is the old way you used to do it.
But hey, don't forget, old is only, what, 12 years?
Yeah, that's true. That's not too bad. I don't feel too bad now.
So paperless caching came out not all that long ago. I want to say the first Garmin with paperless caching was a Colorado back in '06. So we're talking 6 years-ish that's been out. And the big advantage, as far as I'm concerned, with the paperless caching on the Garmin's is I can take that GPX file from my Pocket Query and just drag and drop. So it makes it really easy to load. I don't have to go through any additional software. It just mounts. It's there. I can use the card and load the caches onto the card via that GPX and plug it in if I'm not around a computer or a cable. So that gives me a huge benefit there. But it does give you the icons. It gives you the descriptions. It gives you the terrain, the difficulty. In some cases, it will tell you what trackables are in there. It will give you the hint and some of the logs. So it gives you everything that we needed from the external devices, like all of us here now are using Geosphere on the iPhone. But way back when I started caching, I was using a Palm Tungsten C, and I eventually ended up moving to CacheMate. But originally, I was using the Mobi reader with an ebook that the Pocket Queries would generate and send to you as well. And boy, it worked, but it was really tough. So when the paperless caching came out and I could go down to just the one device and have everything I needed in the one device, I was hooked. And now you can actually get more 2,000-ish on a lot of the devices, caches in there through the paperless caching, and you still don't lose the waypoints, so you can do both. And of course, you still have the POIs. So it's one of those, you're not limited to using just one, but you can use any of these different functions that you want.
And you can use them all together in combination. Exactly.
And so one of the things that I wanted to mention was I have talked with a few cachers who will go and take their MyFind Pocket Query and load that in as POIs, so that way they will know which caches they found. So if they happen to go out placing a cache or something, they can do that. And the advantage to doing the MyFinds is it's all of your finds in the one file. So if you have 500 or 5,000 or more caches that you found, you get those all in one file. If you're going to be working with Pocket Queries, you're limited to only 1,000 and only 5 Pocket Queries a day.
Right.
So if you're looking for the found caches, that's going to be a little bit tougher to get all of your caches if you have something like 5,000 finds.
That's genius. I had never considered putting that in as a point of interest in all my found caches.
Yeah, and that's mostly for the cachers who are heavy placers. And I know guys who have probably as many finds as they do hides.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for those guys, that's really important,
Right.
to know where all of those are. And the problem that I have with using the MyFinds, though, is the MyFinds won't give you your own caches, so you don't know where your own ones are, and it will still give you caches that are archived. So you're still better off, if that's what you're really doing, to use the pocket queries. But if you're looking for something that's going to be a lot more caches than you can do in a single day through pocket queries, that's going to be a good option too. So something to think about.
Well, a little creativity with GSAC would cover that, where you could eliminate the archive caches out of the list before you import it into POIs. So
exactly, you're not going to get your own finds though, so you could do a pocket query of your or your hides rather. So you could do a pocket query of your hides, add that in through GSAC, and you go.
Right. Stick the finds and the hides in the same database. And
Right.
Yeah.
Now, there are more than one way to get any of these things into your units. I mentioned I like doing the drag and drop for the paperless. I don't think we really talked about how you're getting the waypoints in, but typically that's done through GSAC. And for POIs, we've mentioned GSAC. But there's also the manufacturer-provided apps that will get just about any of these in as well. But we've mentioned GSAC several times before in the show, and that does give you some advantages. So why don't we start with Steve with that POI and the macros that you've been using, because that is probably the most unique method of getting the device or the waypoints funneled through into your GPS.
Yeah, we've done it, I guess, two different ways. The Nuvi, the macro that I have used for the Nuvi creates files for the POI loader. So once it creates the files, it would open up the Garmin's POI loader and load them on to the Nuvi in that manner. For my 60s, I used the GSAC POI export. So filtering different types of caches so I can do the different icons. And I just, once GSAC creates the GPI files, I just copy them to the flash card on my 60. So it loads them up in that respect.
Right, and the Nuvi POI loading, I just end up using the GPX files and dragging them. But one of the interesting things that we kind of neglected to mention is with POIs, you do have some additional options that you don't get through just adding them as waypoints or paperless caching. Things like the alerts for proximity. So on the Nuvi, one of the things that I did is load up two different set of POI files. I'd load up a route file and then like a general file. So I would have my general caches without any proximity warnings, but when I got within like 500 feet or something like that, I don't, it depends on what I was doing, how I set it up, but it would send off a proximity warning. So if I were driving, I could set it up for like half a mile, and that way I'd know, oh, well, there's a cache coming up at this rest area. It doesn't necessarily work so well for that because some of the rest areas you'll find are almost a mile long, and by the time it warns you, you're out. But it is an interesting function, and if you are looking for something like, a power trail, that's a great way to get the warnings, and you don't have to sit there and watch the screen then.
Yeah, so we never used that particular function on our Nuvi. I'm not quite sure why. Just trying to filter which ones I wanted to alert on and which ones I didn't just was a little more work than I wanted to. And we were always pretty lazy about our planning, which is another reason why we use the POIs, is I load the entire Washington state on the card. So wherever we go, we're going to know where the caches are nearby, so I don't have to worry about where we're going next weekend and plan that sort of thing. So they're just all there.
Yeah, so that's the big advantage of POIs over the other methods, is that quantity. Roughly how many caches do you think you have stored on those units at any given point?
I think all of the caches in Washington, there's about 25 to 26,000 plus whatever parking and other child coordinates there might be. So probably close to 30 total.
Yeah, so
Wow.
there's not even something that you could do with Waypoints or with Paperless, at least not on most of the units. Well, why don't
No.
we talk about loading up the Waypoints, and what are you doing for the Waypoint loads? That was directed at you, Bad Cop.
Oh, sorry about that. It's been a while since I've done it, but I do use GSAC. And I remember on the eTrex, I would go and edit the name of the waypoint to include the size of the cache, the difficulty, the terrain, and what, the crucial parts of the name that I could fit in the remaining part. And then from there, I remember the summer of the binder, where I kept the binder in the back seat of the caches, in the area. And, I'd get there and pull up what I needed. Also from GSAC, I could export all the geocache descriptions as an HTML file. I would load that on my, what was that, Windows Phone, Windows Mobile?
Well, it might have
4 or
even
5?
been Windows CE. Actually, if it was 4, I think it would be Windows CE still. I don't think they were calling it Windows Mobile yet.
Well, I know that I loaded Windows Mobile 5, but it would have been just before that. So anyway, it was an older phone, but really I would open up this HTML file locally on the phone and have all the descriptions there that I needed, so I could get rid of that binder.
Yeah, which is a big deal, and that was my big problem when I really got hooked on the paperless, was getting all of that information. You had to have a secondary device. You couldn't do it all in one. Not to mention, you've got all of those waypoints that you then have to go and delete all to remove the waypoints and start over if that's what you wanted to do. Now, the
Right.
advantage is in most units, you can go into a particular waypoint, and the way that paperless, or that not paperless, but the way that the geocaching function worked on the Garmin's is when you found it, it would change the icon from a closed treasure chest to an open treasure chest.
Right.
And when you did that, you could then go and delete all of the ones you found and just overwrite with new ones when you wanted to do that.
Yeah, and again, most of the time it was the simple dragging and dropping of the GPX file. However, even those I tend to massage in GSAC before I exported it to a GPX file and dragged it onto my GPS. I would limit the ones that hadn't been found in a while or that had multiple DNFs on them.
Right, and there are a number of other ways to do it aside from GSAC. I ended up using some different apps throughout my caching career using Waypoints. The one that I never used that I always really wanted to try to get to work right for me was GPS Babel, and that was just a matter of I never ended up having the time to sit down and do it when I didn't have to run out the door instantly,
Right.
so I had to go back to the one I already knew.
I never played that much with GPS Babel. I was going to make a few batch files to do, everything that I needed to do, and it never quite clicked for me, quite like GSAC did. But
Well,
that's
GSAC is the best way for getting that extra functionality, like the manipulation of the waypoints. Like we kind of mentioned before, the tools are available from the manufacturers that will allow you to take those waypoints and load them in, usually from a GPX file off of a Pocket Query, or if you want to download the individual ones, whatever. Plus, in some cases, that's how the communicator plugin works, and actually I think it's only the communicator plugin that will still do waypoints. I think the plugin for the Delorme and for the Delorme might do waypoints, but I'm pretty sure that the Magellan plugin from geocaching.com only does the paperless caching now. So I could be wrong. I'd have to go back and grab like the old Triton to see if that actually works, and I don't think that unit's actually functional right now. But you can load the waypoints in, and that's kind of the default. Basecamp is what most users I know are using these days if they're not using GSAC.
Yes, I agree with that. Now tell me on the Triton, did same idea with the point of interest in that?
Yeah, that's pretty much like the earlier eTrex units. There was some paperless support available on there, but it was basically just waypoints with cooler icons.
Okay.
And that Triton was just a disaster. I had too many problems to actually get that thing usable in the field, including being like 150, 200 feet off from any other GPS I was using.
Wow.
So that's a major issue if you can kind of imagine being out with cachers. And if I'm using the Triton as my primary one, I'm like, way on the other side of the trail going, why is everyone over there? It says it's still, 50 feet this way. Found it. Oh, that's why. Yeah. So, yeah, that was not a good unit. And fortunately, they seem to have ventured away from those. Mm-hmm. But let's get into the paperless caching now. And we mentioned one of the nicest features of the paperless caching is the ability to do the drag and drop of the GPX files. And that works on both the Magellans and the Garmins that I've used. The advantage on the Magellan is if you have one of those new Explorers with the paperless caching, you have an option through the Vantage Point software that it will also load the images, but you have to load it through Vantage Point. So if you're on a Explorist, that's going to give you a really, and it has to be one of the GCs or the X10 series units, okay. So like the 110, the 310, the 610s. But that is just amazing, and that's what really drew me to the Magellan units, is that you can get those images in there, which if you're trying to do something like a puzzle cache, that can be indispensable. Mm-hmm. And that is the one problem with just doing the drag and drop of the GPX files, is there's no way to get those images onto the device. Garmin, in most of their units, does support images now, but it doesn't do it as well, and it's certainly not as elegant. So that is a concern if you're trying to do any of those. I don't like relying on one device anyway. I got hooked on the two devices, and having the flexibility and the safety net of having the two different devices. So I cache that way all the time anyway. But that is one of the big reasons why I like having the two separate devices. Is I've got all of the images, I've got everything else right there, whether I'm using a device that has a GPS in it or not, like the Tungsten C. I can go back and look at all those images. I can go back and make any references. I can use things like Evernote while the GPS is still navigating. But getting back to the paperless caching support, that's pretty much the only thing you do is load through the plugin if you want to load one or two, or download your GPX file and load it into the device either through the apps that come with it or just through the desktop by mounting it as a drive. Now there are plugins or macros or whatever for GSAC that will allow you to massage and get more data in and out. So if you want to use GSAC, you can still have a lot more flexibility and functionality than you can without using GSAC, but it does tend to break the tie between GSAC and the GPS. So most people I know using paperless caching don't use GSAC anymore.
I can see that for anymore. I was using it using GSAC to import more logs, more than just the 5 recent. I'd be able to, collect logs, so I'd pull in like 20. So when I was out there, I'd have enough of a history to help me find what I'm looking for. Now, Steve, when you're using the 60 and the Nuvi, do you primarily leave the Nuvi in the car to guide you to the cache?
At this point, yeah. If we're in my wife's car, the Nuvi pretty much stays in there. If we take mine, I've got a built-in nav system, so we usually don't even bring the Nuvi for that one anymore.
Now, are you loading the points of interest into your built-in nav system? No,
I just kind of eyeball the coordinates and enter them in because it wants a different format. So
okay,
we don't do any routing, in the car. It's more eyeballing the map as we're going through.
Yeah, that's the problem with a lot of those internal nav systems, and
Hmm.
my big problem with the nav systems in the car is they're designed, and then by the time they're actually in the car, they're already out of date, and in most cases, they're not updatable. So you end up with, maps are about the only thing you can update, and the software behind it is so far out of date that you're better off using your phone, or
Yeah.
you're still usually better off with something like a Nuvi or a TomTom to do so.
Yeah, I think in my car the nav system is 2006 maps, and yeah,
Yeah,
Toyota
there's a lot of
charges so
stuff that
much
will
money,
change.
so
Oh
I
yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
we just don't bother anymore.
Well, and for cachers, our big problem is almost none of those systems will support coordinates. Now, the nice thing is some manufacturers had realized that there's no way they're going to keep up. So they had gone to either TomTom or to Garmin, and they have embedded Nuvis. And in some cases, those are actually head units that you can remove, take into the house, do all your updates and everything. So that was a really, really nice way to
Oh
go.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And in those cases, they will actually support things like the POIs and the waypoints, so we can do things like use GSAC on them.
And some of the manufacturers gave you the option to email points of interest or waypoints to your nav system in your car.
Yeah, excellent point. So there are some options for people who have the nav systems, but generally that's why we don't typically really address them, is that they're also different as well,
Yeah.
but they typically don't work very well for cachers because they don't support coordinates. They want an address.
Yeah, luckily mine does. I can't actually put in the GPS coordinates, but again, the maps are so old. It's a crapshoot whether it's going to be accurate anyway. So.
Well, and the other problem as well is what datum are they using? We've seen a number of these that are using, if you're lucky, they're just using the same datum that you're going to be using, which is WGS 84.
Right.
Okay, I was going to say I'm not sure if that's right, but some of them are using UTM, and in most cases they're using decimals instead of decimal degrees like we use, and in some cases I've even seen decimal or degrees, minutes, and seconds.
Yeah.
Degrees, minutes, seconds is what the Toyota of 2006 uses. So it's a little conversion in my head. Okay, point whatever decimal minutes is, close enough to 43 seconds, and we'll see what happens.
What we always used to do was actually switch our handheld units over into the different formats so that we could just copy and paste essentially, by hand, but copy and paste the coordinates, so we didn't have to do any conversion and realize, oops, I messed up. That 9 should have been a 2.
Yeah. Let a device do the math for you.
Yes.
Precisely. Well, why don't we wrap up by kind of doing a brief overview of what we don't like about each of these methods, and again, we'll start with Steve and his POIs.
I think my biggest problem is just that I can't edit the waypoints, the POIs in the unit, so I can't mark things as found. Other than that, I think I'm pretty happy with the way it works. I do use GSAC to get all of those POIs, so it's not as easy as the paperless just dragging and dropping, but just not being able to edit the waypoints, I think, is my biggest problem with the way it goes.
All right, and Bad Cop?
Well, with the waypoints, they're quick and dirty. You can enter them in, change them quickly. However, you don't have a lot of supporting data. You don't have a hint. You don't have any logs. So that's the downside.
All right, and as for the paperless caching, there are so many different versions on so many different devices, and they work a little bit differently. But generally, the biggest drawback I have with the points or with the paperless caching is for multi-caches and for puzzle caches, and this is something that we kind of neglected to get into in our discussion earlier. You don't really have the option on most of those to move the pin. So if you're going to do a second stage, you have to add a waypoint typically. Sometimes they'll let you actually add a second cache. but then you're adding another cache or another waypoint with a different name, and it does tend to get a little bit cluttered and a little bit messy. So that's where I really have issues with using paperless caching. Otherwise, I really like using it, and that's my favorite way to load those waypoints. So have we changed anyone's mind here, or everyone going to stick with their preferred methods?
Okay, I admit, Steve, I really like the whole idea of loading an entire state as POIs. So I may do that in my Oregon, load them all up. I can use that to navigate to the site. I'll probably switch to the iPhone then to actually run out of the car, go get the cache, and come back. So I can leave the Oregon right there on the dash, plugged in, run out, come back. So you may have a convert. I'm going to have to give that a shot and see how it works for me.
Okay.
And I will admit that I do use POIs almost exclusively on the Nuvi, since it doesn't support the paperless caches. And I hate that I have to go and delete all of my waypoints on the Nuvi and then reload them from the app. So the POIs are the way to go. Plus, it gives me the flexibility of additional waypoint or additional caches over the 500 limit that the Nuvi has, and the proximity warning. So I do use the POIs quite a bit, and really the only thing I stopped using are the waypoints. I only use those now if it is a multi-cache and I have to drop in a waypoint, or if I'm placing a new cache, and for that there's nothing that you can do to get around it. It's you're pretty much stuck with waypoints on every unit for placing a cache.
That's true.
Yeah, and I would like to try out the cache, the paperless caching portion, but until I decide to replace one of those 60s with something a little newer, I think we're pretty much stuck with one of the other two versions here. So, well,
Steve, you and I are going to have to get together since we're in the same state. I'll bring my paperless caching Oregon. You bring your waypoint loaded or your POI loaded Nuvi, and we'll get together and find some caches.
All right, sounds good.
Sounds like a great little outing there to compare them all. But let's have a little bit of fun just before we go, and kind of future forward looking. I'm curious what you guys think about your next GPS, or if you're even going to do another GPS. Yeah, I do it mostly because I'm in the shows here, and I like having a GPS, but I'm not 100% sure at this point that I would be going out and spending the money on a GPS anymore.
Boy, that is a tough call. I was able to interview a representative from Magellan just a couple of weeks ago, and he mentioned that they are working on wireless options for their devices, be it Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. So, something like that may change the way I look at these devices.
Yeah, then there are some options on some of the Nuvis now where through Bluetooth you can do some controls and manipulation. And really the biggest thing is on the Nuvis, being able to send your contacts instantly or your finds instantly to the Nuvis. So I do think that we're going to see some more coming there. And once we do get that connectivity, I think the GPSs are going to become more relevant once again. But Steve, you're probably the one using the oldest GPS here, and quite honestly, I still have my old Sport Trek, which is even older than that 60. I just don't tend to use it very often. It's a museum piece, but the 60 is still a great unit. There's really not much of a reason to upgrade if you've got the iPhone to do all of that paperless functionality. Is that even something that you're really looking at as a draw to investing in a new unit?
At this point, I'm very happy with the 60 and using either my iPhone or iPod for the Geosphere paperless. So I don't really see an upgrade in my future unless that 60 takes a tumble somewhere. And then I'm guessing I'd probably go to a 62 because I like the form factor of that 60 and the buttons, and I'm not a touchscreen guy, so I think I'm going to stick with something pretty similar.
Despite having the touchscreen on the phone, you don't want one on your GPS.
Yeah, it's just too. I don't like using the touchscreen out in the field. Gloves and the whole works. My wife got me some gloves that work on the iPhone, but I still prefer the hard buttons on the 60.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
kind of right there with you.
and with all the rain we get out here, I have a hard time pulling the iPhone out, even if it's not raining at the moment. But you're walking through the woods and the leaves are wet, and you brush up. You get the sudden downfall there.
Yeah, I do have otter boxes for all of my iOS devices, but
right.
Yeah, there's still not. There's
still
still some open spots there.
Right. It still makes me nervous.
Yeah.
Well, I have to admit, I tend to use just the dry bag when I'm out in any kind of moist, damp weather, because I just don't like the otter boxes all that much. But what I do have is that extended battery, and that's one of the reasons why I don't tend to like the otter boxes so much.
Yeah, if we're going out for an extended time, I'll use my iPod instead of my iPhone, just to make sure that iPhone has battery if I need it.
Which is lacking that GPS, so it's a very different caching experience when you actually have to go and do a search to find the cache rather than just pull it up and say, oh, yeah, that's a cache. It's the closest one to me.
Yeah, and that's where, every time I find one, I mark that one as the center point, so the next one will be at least somewhere in the first screen or two, wherever we might be heading. So it takes a little getting used to, but we just started caching about a little over 2 years ago. So we've had that iPod since day one for the paperless, even when I was just using the little eTrex. So that's what I started on. That's what I'm used to. So that's what works.
Yeah, it's amazing at how much influence what you started with has on your caching throughout the career. So thank you again, Steve, for joining us. It's been a great opportunity to really get a look at all three and what some of the advantages and disadvantages are to each.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me on today. This has been a lot of fun.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And we are looking for ideas for shows, and if you're an expert in any one of these fields, let us know, and we'd love to get you on the show and talk with us. Our listeners are some of our best resources, and one of the greatest things that we've done on some of the other shows is get someone who's done a really cool and interesting hide. So if you have something that's kind of a tech hide, we'd love to get someone on. One of the great ones, I don't know if you've seen these or not, Bad Cop, has been some of the ones where you actually have to either call in or where you have to whistle a tune or something like that. And getting into that kind of tech level on a cache just really intrigues me.
There's one nearby here that has a huge series of switches that you have to get in the right position and pump up an air cylinder before it'll open.
That is a great one.
Yeah, I've heard about that one. That would be another excellent one that I'd love to find out more about how that works. So if you guys know of someone who's done an interesting cache, then we might be able to contact, or if you yourself have done an interesting cache that would be worthy, let us know, and we'd love to get you on. Or if you have an expertise in anything else, just let us know, and we'd love to get you on the show.
I'd love to be able to speak with a true rocket scientist.
There you go.
And see and find out what it takes to launch a GPS satellite into geosynchronous orbit.
Or talk with someone who works on the floor building those GPS satellites, because we know that there's new ones going up now.
Yep. So if you know anybody, give them our number, see if they're interested. Also, you can check out the Cacheamaniacs website at cacheamaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes from this and all our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by calling 206-350-3647, by emailing geogearheads at cacheamaniacs.com, or through social media. Your support helps keep the Cacheamaniacs shows coming. Please consider making a PayPal donation through the link on our website to support the Cacheamaniacs shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Umfenauer and Daryl Wattenberg. This show is copyright 2012 by Daryl Wattenberg. All rights reserved.
Cache with the Cacheamaniacs.